Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Shama Parveen, and I'm the Director of Research on the water team at Series. Thank you all for joining us today to learn about the findings from our newly released benchmark report. This is the second iteration of our benchmark. We published the first one in 2023. Next, please. So in today's session, I'll start us off by providing some brief context about the report and the 6 investor-backed corporate expectations. Then my colleague Ben Jacobson will take us through some of the key findings from the benchmark. This will be followed by a brief reflection from Sarah Traubel at Qantas. They are a consultant partner for the project, after which we'll move into the panel discussion. We hope the discussions can help unpack both the areas of progress and the persistent gaps, as well as the benchmark utility for company, investor, and stakeholder audiences. Please note that the session is being recorded and closed captioning is available if you should require this feature. We encourage you all to ask questions using the Q&A function, and we'll try and get to those during the panel session. Next, please. So for the panel discussion and Q&A, we'll be joined by Marie-Anne Paulin from Danone, Philippe Bernardis from Northern Trust Asset Management, and Sarah Traubel from Qantas. Please take a moment to review the disclaimer on the slide before we proceed. So the second edition of the benchmark comes at a really important time. We are seeing global water pressures intensify, and it's showing up everywhere. You've probably noticed a surge in news stories with regard to extreme weather events and physical pressures on water systems, including examples of how industries are influencing freshwater resources and at the same time feeling the consequences of growing water stress. So, what you see on this slide is just a small snapshot of that. These headlines reflect trends that we are tracking more closely, especially across the 4 industries that you see here. That's the focus of our initiative. And when you look past these headlines, the underlying data shows the situation is even more stark. According to a Global Commission report, there will be a 40% shortfall in freshwater supply by 2030. And we know that supply chains are already exposed. CDP analysis puts at least $77 billion of value at risk from water related impacts in global supply chains. So, at the broader system level, also, the economic value supported by water and freshwater ecosystems is estimated at $58 trillion, which is around 60% of global GDP. So, all this to say that or underscores quite starkly how deeply economic stability, productivity, and development depend on functioning water systems and supplies. So, with that context in mind, the need for a coordinated investor led effort became important and thus led to the launch of the Value Water Finance Initiative in 2022. So, at the core, we are asking companies to treat fresh water for what it truly is, an irreplaceable resource that underpins industries, communities, and ecosystems. And since the initiative launched, it's continued to build momentum. We now have more than 100 investor signatories who are actively engaging companies across the 4 industries that we focus on. And at the core of the initiative, as you see here, are a set of 6 investor backed corporate expectations for valuing water. It's our shared ambition for what companies should achieve by 2030. These expectations span a full range of water issues, from reducing water withdrawals, improving water quality, to protecting ecosystems, ensuring access to water and sanitation, strengthening board oversight, and engaging responsibly in public policy. And while the materiality of water can look different depending on the industry or where a company sits within in the value chain, these expectations lay out an ambition that applies to all large companies, regardless of sector or where they are in their water stewardship journey. So this is really where the benchmark also comes in. The benchmark evaluates 71 companies on our focus list across apparel, beverage, food, and high-tech industries. to understand closely how these companies are aligning with the six corporate expectations and thus giving us a clear picture of where the gaps are or where leading practices are emerging. The assessment is based on a sector agnostic methodology where we evaluated corporate disclosures like sustainability reports, press releases, financial filings, and CDP responses available through the end of March of this year. So, to get a sense of how companies stack up against the 2030 ambition in the corporate expectations, we place each company's overall score into one of the four categories along this ambition spectrum. Think of this ambition spectrum as a snapshot in time showing where companies currently are in their water stewardship journey. It starts with starting the journey, which is where we see companies that are still in the early stages of acting on the full set of expectations. And as you move across this ambition spectrum to on the way or on track, you see companies demonstrating progressively stronger and more holistic ambition. It's encouraging to see that since 2023, we have fewer companies in starting the journey category and more have reached on track. And we also have one company now in leading the way category. So the dot plot here shows how companies are performing in each corporate expectation compared to the 2023 benchmark. This year, we find that companies are progressing on water quantity, access to water, and sanitation and public policy engagement. We see that action within board oversight has stalled a bit, though it remains one of the expectations with the highest median score. Unfortunately, water quality, as you see here, continues to be a lagging area of action and focus within corporate water stewardship strategies. So, this is something we need to further engage companies and investors on. The decline in ecosystem protection that you see here, it reflects largely from the refined methodology, which now places stronger emphasis on companies demonstrating freshwater outcomes from their ecosystem and sustainable sourcing initiatives. So, zooming further into company performance, it is encouraging to see that about two-thirds of the companies on our focus list have improved their total benchmark score. And within that group, 18 have moved up to the next ambition category. You can see the breakdown by category and industry on the slide here. The increase that we find, it's largely driven by stronger action across the expectations, expanded disclosures from companies, alignment with emerging regulations, and more progress on some of the advanced indicators that we have on our benchmark. On the other hand, 20 companies saw a decline in their total scores, and the smaller decreases were generally tied to the methodological refinements, which placed more emphasis on connecting targets to collective action projects or sourcing strategies to freshwater benefits. But the larger drops tended to reflect from companies restructuring their water strategies or companies reevaluating what they disclose as they adjust to new regulatory requirements. Many companies, for instance, reported that they were updating their reporting practices in response to EU CSRD, especially the requirement to conduct double materiality assessments that account for both impact and financial materiality. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Ben, who will provide some key highlights from the benchmark.
Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin Jacobson. I'm manager of water and agriculture here on the water team at Ceres. So, against the context provided by Shama, let's dive a little further into the 2025 benchmark findings and some key highlights from the report. So, looking at the six corporate expectations and company action across all four industries, we identified 13 key findings that really build on the insights from our 2023 baseline report. For example, under the water quantity expectation, we're seeing steady progress. Many companies are strengthening their water availability targets, broadening the scope to cover more parts of the value chain, and improving transparency with clearer progress updates. At the same time, there is a need for more science-based, risk-differentiated, or contextual target setting, especially considering company supply chains. The report also highlights significant opportunity for companies to conduct more comprehensive, locally informed water risk and impact assessments and expand supply chain disclosure around water use. At the bottom of the forthcoming slides, you will find some logos representing the companies that perform strongly on each expectation or demonstrate best practices for a sub-indicator. For example, in this expectation, Apple has set a risk differentiated target across its value chain, which includes a commitment to replenish all corporate freshwater withdrawals in high stress locations, certify all Apple owned data centers under the AWS standard, and support suppliers in reaching an average 50% water reuse rate by 2030. Similar to 2023, as Shama alluded to, the 2025 assessment shows that corporate action on water quality is still falling short. There are a few encouraging signs in that more companies are setting operational water quality targets related to the safe disposal of pollutants, complying with local regulations or internal standards, and aligning with industry guidelines. One example of a leading practice is Cargill, which has committed to reducing 5,000 metric tons of water pollutants in water stressed regions by 2030, focusing largely on the agricultural supply chain and reductions through regenerative agriculture and nature-based solutions. Most targets, however, are general rather than contextual, that is, tailored to local watershed or ecosystem conditions. And supply chains remain a major blind spot, although water quality risks are concentrated where raw materials are extracted or processed. Additionally, we only saw a small subset of companies explaining how context informs their water quality risk assessments or reporting discharge volumes overall. Looking at the ecosystem protection expectation, we are seeing more companies engaging in freshwater restoration projects and assessing nature-related impacts and risks, but very few have targets that directly focus on freshwater ecosystems, and most aren't showing clear evidence that their sustainable sourcing strategies are improving water availability or quality. As Shama mentioned earlier, our 2025 methodology puts more weight on demonstrating actual freshwater outcomes from ecosystem and sourcing initiatives. Out of 71 companies, only 19 meet the highest level of ambition by embedding and disclosing those outcomes in their sourcing commitments, policies, and supplier engagement. One example for sourcing commitment is LVMH, which has committed to ensuring that 100% of its strategic raw materials such as cotton, wool, and precious metals, are certified to standards that help conserve ecosystems and water resources by 2026. Promisingly, we also see some progress with respect to companies describing their processes for assessing nature-related risks or impacts across both operations and supply chains. We find that almost all companies are taking some action on access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, or WASH, but only 4% of companies are addressing it comprehensively across the entirety of their value chain. That is, employees, suppliers, and communities. This represents a small improvement over 2023. This year, after stakeholder consultations to refine our methodology, we added a new indicator to capture the link between climate impacts and WASH. While no company fully met this advanced sub-indicator yet to get a score, disclosures are increasingly showing awareness of the climate effects on WASH. On the internal policy side, 41% of companies now recognize WASH as a human right, but that's still fewer than half of the focus list, highlighting the need for companies to step up and really make this a priority. When it comes to risk assessments, including WASH, very few focus companies are doing so comprehensively. And looking at WASH through the gender lens, the picture is even smaller with only 6 companies taking this approach. As an example of a comprehensive WASH risk assessment, Nestle has identified 56 priority countries for WASH action using watershed level assessments, the WASH pledge, community mapping, and local on the ground interviews. This really helps them to understand the risk across the entirety of their operations, tier one suppliers, agriculture supply chains, and nearby communities. Though we have seen some promising progress, there is still a bit of a way to go for companies to understand and address wash risks in a way that's really inclusive and aligned with human rights. Board oversight continues to be one of the strongest performing expectations, with more companies putting formal oversight of water related issues at senior level. Since 2023, we've really seen an increase in several areas. More companies now have formal board oversight on water issues. More companies are linking governance to water-related incentives. More board members have water expertise, and a few more companies now have a board committee charter that specifically mentions water. However, despite these improvements, there is still room to improve. While 85% of companies do mention considering water risks and opportunities in business planning within both direct operations and the supply chain, or the supply chain, only 24% disclose these considerations for the entirety of the value chain. That is, risks and opportunities for water for both operations and the supply chain. A good example of this is presented by Asahi, which assesses water risks and opportunities across operations and supply chain using TCFD and TNFD frameworks. In the face of flooding, groundwater depletion, and drought-driven crop failures, the company has identified water efficiency and wastewater reuse strategies to generate cost savings, as well as securing new water sources for diversifying suppliers. Internal water pricing also remains limited. The number of companies using internal water prices hasn't changed since 2023, and only two companies continue to take into account broader environmental societal benefits from water pricing. Encouragingly, this year's assessment also shows that companies are making progress on public policy engagement, but some gaps remain. Compared to 2023, more companies are disclosing efforts to advocate for water-related issues, yet only a few provide concrete examples showing how their engagement drives real-world impact. For example, Google is engaged in activities to reduce artificial diversions and restore natural water flows, protecting the West Side Basin aquifer, which is a key groundwater source for several municipalities in San Francisco. This has helped local organizations advocate for increased access to grants for resilient infrastructure projects to mitigate the impacts of urban development, reduced aquifer recharge, and sewer overflow in the area. It is essential for companies to demonstrate advocacy that supports stronger water governance, infrastructure improvements, and equitable access, especially in high water stress regions where systemic challenges can't be solved by companies alone. Company disclosures often stop short of showing the depth of engagement with stakeholders or the tangible outcomes for freshwater resources. Similar trend appears in lobbying. More companies now disclose that their lobbying does consider water, whether it's tied to SDG 6 or internal corporate water strategies, yet only two companies show clear examples of lobbying that aligns with their water stewardship goals. Benchmark also highlights how companies are integrating justice and equity considerations into their water strategies, particularly through WASH, climate resilience, advocacy, and replenishment initiatives. A small but growing number of companies are recognizing the importance of gender inclusion and community participation. Companies are also starting to factor climate risks like droughts and floods into water and sanitation access, helping ensure reliability for vulnerable communities. We find more companies are linking advocacy efforts to equitable access and environmental justice, but most still don't disclose how these actions lead to tangible community benefits. Overall, companies are making progress, but disclosure and demonstration of on-the-ground impact remain limited. With regard to collective action, we evaluated how such efforts support water-related targets. While 83% of companies have set water quantity targets, fewer than half, just 41%, link those targets to collective action. For water quality, 41% of companies set targets, yet only 17% connect them to collaborative efforts. As a best practice example, PepsiCo is engaging in collective action projects to help meet its goal of replenishing more than 100% of the water it uses at high water risk sites by 2030. This includes land restoration, land conservation, wetland preservation, and protecting aquatic habitats. Without this type of alignment, projects can feel ad hoc, disconnected from corporate strategies, and are less likely to generate measurable results. Most companies still provide limited detail about their role in collaborative projects, how outcomes are tracked, or what tools they use to ensure accountability. In addition to the key findings, we've also put together reports focused on 4 industries we track, just as we did in 2023. These reports give a clear view of overall industry outcomes and show individual companies' performance compared to their peers. I encourage you all to explore these reports, which are available on the benchmark landing page, along with the key findings. In summation, companies are advancing water stewardship, but progress is uneven across the corporate expectations and not happening quickly enough, nor at the scale needed to meet the 2030 ambition. The assessment, therefore, makes it clear actions need to be accelerated. To meet the rapidly approaching 2030 ambition, the 2025 benchmark report includes a clear call to action for all corporate stakeholders. Companies, for example, can use the benchmark to elevate water issues to boards, senior leadership, and cross-functional teams, helping to drive stronger integration into business planning and decision making. Investors can support accountability and transparency, encouraging companies to set ambitious water targets, strategies, and demonstrate measurable progress over time. And finally, NGOs and other stakeholders can continue to develop guidance, tools, best practices to help companies address gaps and seize opportunities, as well as facilitate sharing of best practices across sectors using the benchmark as a reference to further the ambition on water stewardship. Thank you all for joining me. With that, I will pass it over to Sarah Trouble from Qantas to provide some reflections on the benchmark project. Just as a reminder, please send in any questions that you may have through the Q&A feature in the chat, and we will try to get to those shortly. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Ben, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So my name is Sarah Traubel. I work as a nature lead in Switzerland for Qantas, which is a strategic sustainability consultancy. And we've had the pleasure to be Cirrus's knowledge partner in this 2025 benchmark. So our team reviewed the disclosure of the 71 assessed companies and then benchmarked them according to the methodology. So I was asked to provide some insights on the value of the benchmark to advancing action on water. And you'll see those here reflected on the slide. So just to walk you through, so I think one key contribution of this initiative and the methodology is that it can help stakeholders navigate fragmented guidance. So as many of you know, unlike for climate, the water space doesn't have a single unifying framework. So there's no Paris Agreement for water. And there's a certain level of complexity in the water space. So, for example, having different types of frameworks covering water quantity, water quality. So this diversity of frameworks also, of course, reflects the complexity of water issues, but it also makes it challenging for companies to know what good actually looks like. So, of course, the benchmark is not a standard, and it shouldn't be seen as such. But this being said, it is currently the only place which brings together a consolidated view of what a good practice looks like across these different dimensions outlined in the 6 corporate expectations. So I do encourage anyone listening in to dive into the methodology and find out what this laddering up to best practice looks like across the different expectations and indicators. A second point is the value of context-based perspectives. So again, just to reiterate my earlier point, water challenges are inherently local, and what matters isn't just the ambition, but where and how the action takes place. And too often we see that companies disclose strong commitments at a global level, but those commitments may not drive meaningful change if they're not rooted in local context. And the methodology values and rewards those companies that have gone through the process of identifying their hotspots. So meaning where their largest impacts and dependencies are across the value chain, and also where water risk exposure is the highest. And these companies will then focus their actions in those hotspots. And so the methodology really rewards this context-based water stewardship, ensuring that investments and interventions are targeted where they make the biggest difference. And then as a third point, so as Ben already outlined, there is a role that this initiative plays in the broader ecosystem of actors that try to advance corporate water stewardship to ensure that there's that we get to a safe landing point in 2030 in terms of water security for all. So there's a certain role that the methodology plays in terms of providing a common language for different stakeholders. So for investors, companies, NGOs, and also policymakers, it helps clarify where the sector stands, where practices are currently lagging, and where collective action is most needed. And as we've seen in the data that Ben just shared, there are still major gaps in both ambition and implementation. And so by providing this shared evidence base, the benchmark helps align the different actors toward advancing best practice. And finally, for companies themselves, the benchmark offers actionable insights. So for those companies that were benchmarked, there is a clear picture in terms of where in the future they may wish to focus efforts, how to prioritize interventions, and how to continue to stay aligned with stakeholder expectations. And as Shama and Ben mentioned, Ceres continues to iterate the methodology, making sure that it continues to be in line with evolutions and best practice. And so the methodology also plays a role in not just measuring, but also incentivizing progress and guiding companies towards a more equitable, resilient water stewardship. So yeah, so from our perspective, the methodology and the overall valuing water finance initiative, it's a strong potential as a catalyst for progress, helping companies and other stakeholders navigate complexity, reward leadership, and then drive meaningful water action where it's the most needed. At this point, Shama, I think I will pass back to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Ben. I would now like to turn to the panel discussion and Q&A part of our event today. So I would like to invite the panelists to, if you could please take the slides down and invite the panelists. In no particular order, we have Marie-Anne Paulin. She's a global sustainability lead for water and biodiversity at Danone and leads strategic initiatives focused on sustainable water management in agricultural food systems. We also have Philippe Bernardis from Northern Trust Asset Management. He's the regional head of stewardship, responsible for governance and sustainability engagements with portfolio companies, as well as proxy voting and policy development across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And finally, I would like to invite back Sarah Trouble from Qantas. She works with companies globally to integrate water stewardship and nature positive strategies into their sustainability agendas. So welcome panelists. To begin, let's ground our discussion on what motivates action. One of the benchmark's strongest areas, as you saw, was water quantity. So Mariel, let's start with you. Could you tell us briefly about Danone's impact journey and how water is prioritized within it?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm glad to share some experiences and feedbacks indeed of how water is today addressed in Danone. So we have indeed released in 2023 our Danone Impact Journey, which is our global sustainability roadmap, which aims to bring health through food to as many as possible. And as part of the nature pillar, we have indeed some water-related targets, which are to drive water footprint reduction across our value chain. And out of those ones, we especially have a 4R strategy, especially tied to our operations, meaning reduce, reuse, recycle, and reclaim, that we want to have this roadmap through all our sites by 2030. As well as having a contextual goal to reduce water consumption by 50% in high water risks. So that's for I would say, the first factories or water ambition within our factories. Then we have also some ambition to have around our factories some collective programs, water collective programs, to be able to preserve and restore watersheds where we operate. And we also have I would say, if we have a full value chain approach, the final KPI, which is linked to the 50% of our key raw materials volume that comes from water-stressed region, to be sourced from water improved management practices. So all of those KPIs are also explained and contextualized within our Danone water policy, freshly released in 2024. Happy to elaborate further.
Thanks, Marianne. Philip, I'd like to turn to you now. Could you briefly introduce Northern Trust Asset Management and share why stewardship and engagement are central to your investment approach?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. Northern Trust Asset Management is a global asset manager with over $1.4 trillion in assets under management. Now, the majority of our assets are invested in index strategies, and that means that we almost semi-permanent capital in our invested companies. We stay invested in companies as long as they're part of the index. And because of that, we can simply divest from a company if we have concerns. Instead, we focus on what we can control, and therefore active ownership is a key part of our investment strategy. And through engagement and voting, we use our voice as shareholders to influence companies and promote positive change. And we've seen real results, companies improving, for example, their sustainability and corporate governance practices, and strengthening them and creating long-term value. And that's what stewardship means to us, using our voice and vote as shareholders in order to drive positive change and outcomes.
Great, thanks. Marianne, I have a follow-up here, and it jives with one of the investor questions we have. Sorry, one of the audience questions. What was the rationale for setting both a strategic global target as well as a contextual site-specific one?
Yes, as a matter of fact, so we are food and beverage company. I haven't mentioned it, but meaning that we have some global activities all around the world, and all of our business rely on water, as a matter of fact. So whether we are located in China, in France, in the United States, so we needed to have this global strategic targets to be able to globally reach our ambition to safeguard the water that we utilize in all across our activities. But on the other hand, we know that water is local and is a local issue, and hence needs to also be addressed considering the contextual and local environment. So that's why we decided to also have this local target, being able to have I would say achievable and impactful roadmap, context-based.
Great, thanks. And of course, while water quantity often takes center stage, we saw from benchmark that water quality remains a key gap in corporate water stewardship strategies. So, Sarah, if I can start with you from your vantage point, working closely with companies, what practical steps can organizations take to improve their performance on water quality?
Yeah, thanks very much, Shama. So indeed, it is important to note that there is still a major gap on water quality, and I think it is often called the invisible crisis, right? Of water resources declining in quality, so that they impact both human health and ecosystem health. Um, so in terms of, I think, we do see that many companies are, of course, driving progress across their value chain on water quality. But for companies that may be starting out on their journey, there are some clear steps that they can take. So, of course, the first step is about meeting local regulations. But we all know that in many places, these regulations are often not strong or not well enforced. So it is important that also companies aim to go beyond compliance. And so a good way to do that is to set a company-wide standard that applies to all facilities, and that also includes pollutants that are most relevant to the sector. So that, really to ensure that there's some level of consistency. But then for companies that have a large agricultural supply chain or that directly produce agricultural inputs, it's also key to look at nutrient runoff. And here, it was already mentioned earlier as a good practice by Ben, regenerative agriculture plays a key role and is also an important opportunity to help improve soil health, ascertain also freshwater ecosystem health downstream, and then overall also strengthen supply resilience. Because there is also increasing evidence to show that regenerative agriculture approaches also really make business sense in terms of stability of supply and farmer income. I think or at least I hope there's also some industry associations here as part of the audience today. And I think for them, I would also make a call to action to push more on sector-specific guidances. So we have some examples that are already existing with ZDHC and the Roadmap to Zero that really tries to tackle chemical management in the textile sector. And there's huge potential also to extend that to some other sectors. But there are still some sectors where such standards don't exist. So I think there's also a key role that industry associations can play in terms of defining, okay, what are the key pollutants of concern in our sector, and what's the level of influence that companies can have to influence those, really rallying together that there's more of a common standard. And then finally, as with any water challenge, progress on water quality issues really depends on the extent of collective action at the basin level. So of course, there's individual improvements that any actor and water user needs to make, but in order to achieve impact at scale, companies need to act collectively at a basin level. So I think that's also key as companies start addressing these issues.
Thanks, Sarah. And in terms of guidance, if I may add, the volumetric water quality benefit accounting guide just got published. So that provides methods to quantify water quality improvements. And for companies who are investing in nature-based water projects, the nature-based solutions guide is valuable also for evaluating multiple ecosystem benefits, including co-benefits and stuff. So I mean, don't let limited data be a constraint, gradually improve your monitoring, collect more data, and move towards contextual watershed-specific goals. So, Philippe, if I may ask, BWF, Northern Trust has been Valuing Water Finance Initiative signatory for a number of years. So as an investor, can you walk us through why you are prioritizing work on water issues?
Certainly. We are looking at water through the lens of financial materiality. And water scarcity and poor management aren't just environmental concerns for us, but they are like business risks. And as you know, they can disrupt like supply chains, increase costs, and lead to regulatory or reputational challenges, especially in sectors like food and textiles, where water dependency is very high. Now, by prioritizing water stewardship, we're encouraging companies to build that resilience and protect long-term value creation for shareholders and ultimately, of course, our clients. To support this, we also recently published a paper on natural capital, including water management, that provides practical, I would say, guidance for investing companies on how to address these water risks and natural capital risks and opportunities.
Great. And I have a follow-up question with you. So, from your conversations with companies, why might water quality be lagging, and how do you think we could bring more attention to the topic?
Certainly. So I think some of the outcomes, some of the findings that we have through engagements are consistent with those of your benchmark report. Over time, we've seen it's a clear shift in companies' receptivity to water-related engagements. And initially our discussions with the invested companies were more focused, I would say narrowly focused on water use and compliance. And we have started now moving away from that. Now, many companies recognize water as a strategic risk for them and tied to climate, supply chain resilience, and community relations. And this evolution reflects, I would say, growing investor pressure and also stakeholder expectations. And we work collaboratively with other investors, for example, like, through of course, your initiative, and also with our invested companies, sharing best practices, encouraging science-based targets, and linking water stewardship to long-term value creation. And by framing water not just as an isolated, I would say, issue, but as part of an interconnected system, I think companies are more willing to invest in solutions that deliver both environmental and financial benefits. We've engaged in 2025 with companies in, for example, the beverage sector on the topic of water stewardship. And so far, I would say discussions have been constructive. Our focus has included encouraging firms to expand the number of sites, for example, covered by water stewardship programs, and in some cases to raise the level of ambition beyond water-stressed areas. And similarly, also companies in the pharma sector have been receptive to dialogue on water risk and opportunities. But I would say that it's one recurring challenge is that many businesses concentrate their targets and strategies on high risk or water stressed locations. And while this is understandable, I think the next step is to encourage companies to apply the lessons learned from these high impact sites across all operations. And this will help, of course, like mitigate risks and prevent lower risk areas from deteriorating over time. Hope I've answered your question.
No, that was very insightful. Thanks. Marianne, if I can come back to you, you saw on the benchmark that few companies are adopting internal water pricing, and that's important for companies to fully value water. We find that Danone has developed its own cost-benefit analyses for its factories and agricultural ingredients. Can you explain the process and how it has improved your understanding of water's true cost and informed your long-term business strategy planning?
Yes, thanks for the question. So indeed, this cost-benefit analysis is like the last step of like what we called our global water prioritization process. Of course, much now resonates much with the EU regulation, the EU CSRD regulation, but we indeed have for some years now started to better appreciate our dependencies, our risks, both so linked to our water footprint assessment, our water risk assessment. And at the end of the day, when we are into some discussions with executive, even like to come and support decision making into boardrooms, the financial incentives, or I would say quantification, was needed. So if I take really the example of sourcing, we compared the cost of action with the cost of inaction, also to reflect on what Philippe just said. It's really a matter of having a global view about license to operate and like future proofing, I would say, our sourcing strategies. Being able to consider for a specific supply chain coming from a specific region, if we are to implement some regenerative agricultural practices, it will cost that amount of money. If we are doing nothing, that's the kind of money we can lose. So that's also, of course, not to be taken as absolute values. Where it's powerful, it's when you take a step back and that you compare out of the portfolio of options to really guide the decision, relying on financial quantification.
Thanks, Marianne. I see a question here. Why isn't internal water pricing more common with companies? So I can take a step from what we found from the benchmark, and yeah, if one of you could add, if you like. So we found that internal water pricing, as you saw from the benchmark, it's still relatively uncommon among companies, even though it's a powerful tool for embedding water considerations into business decisions. And there were a few reasons that we saw from our analyses. Many companies were lacking internal expertise or resources, or don't see water pricing as a strategic priority. Some mentioned the absence of standardized methodologies, so which could also, constrain the organizational buy-in for the process. That said, companies can start by assessing the costs and risks associated with water use, and by using studies like, some company examples like Danone's, and we also see a few companies that we have mentioned in the key finding report. We also recently published a study on cost-benefit analyses on avoided environmental costs. It also helps quantify both the financial and societal value for proactive water stewardship, thus making it clear that how companies can build a business case for stronger water management practices. So starting small, focusing on high-risk operations, and gradually scaling internal water pricing initiatives could be effective ways to overcome the barriers. Marianne, Sarah, anything else to add here?
I would say not that much. I mean, it's honestly true also for internal decision. It's really great tool to better, I would say, engage with internal stakeholders, to also be able to have the same language within our different streams, so that we can better also have a global view, as we are still a business.
Great. Yeah. While I have you, we have this, if I can ask you a question on, holistic strategies. Danone has a goal to develop collaborative preservation and restoration plans for 100% of your production sites in high water stress areas. Could you elaborate on how this target addresses fresh water, as well as help you evaluate the co-benefits that it creates, and why was this commitment important for Danone?
Yes, so this one is a big question indeed. This collaborative approach is really part of our guiding principles that we also elaborate much more in our Danone water policy. Water being a shared resource, we believe collaboration with local watershed stakeholders is a must, actually, to ensure successful and long-term impacts. In many places, we are talking more and more about the grey water cycle and the local water cycle. More and more, the local water cycle is disrupted, and that needs to be definitely tackled at the watershed level. So that's what, for instance, we have in Indonesia. We have the Reroso project. So Reroso is a watershed in Java. This watershed supply the Java population in water supply. And as a matter of fact, science told us that the ground table is being depleted, and the water table dropped like 1 meter in 5 years, for instance, and the flow rate also declined. It was some years ago, and we decided then to set up kind of a collaborative approach with different watersheds users. So having upstream, midstream, and downstream activities linked to all of the different users of the watershed, meaning that we have, for instance, agroforestry activities upstream. We also have some trainings with rice paddy farmers cultivation to be able to have a wiser use of water during their rice cultivation. So at the end of the day, this reduces the water footprint globally at this watershed level, and having much of water governance forum, which is one also of our pillar when we are talking about collective approach and collaborative approach at the watershed level. We also are there to ensure that we are part of the solution, but we are not the only one leading it. Otherwise, of course, it won't last. So the idea is to have a long-term relationship built with local stakeholders.
Great.
Having having also the local authorities around the table for sure.
Thanks, Marianne. So, Philippe, if I can come back to you, can you share how the benchmark informs your your stewardship work?
Certainly, the benchmark is a useful tool for us because it sets clear expectations for how companies should manage water-related risks and opportunities. We also use it to guide our engagement priorities and also as part of our engagement strategy that we set at the beginning of the year, and looking at governance, strategy, risk assessment, and disclosure. For example, if a company operates in water-stressed regions, let's say, but doesn't have measurable targets or a robust water stewardship plan, then that's a red flag from a financial materiality perspective. And the benchmark, therefore, there can help us identify gaps and also to ask the right questions in engagements, and ultimately also encourage companies to align with best practices that protect both natural resources and long-term shareholder value.
Great. Is there a particular component of the framework or the expectations that's been helpful in your engagement?
I would say is the framework, and also the fact that it identifies where companies are at in terms of water. So we take a rather, I would say, holistic approach. But again, I would say it helps us. A very important part for us is like when it helps us identify gaps. So we're happy and we welcome that you've recently published the second version of it, and we will certainly be utilizing this.
Okay, thanks. Sarah, if I may come back to you. Given that we find that the progress is not as accelerated as required and 2030 is just around the corner, so of the many potential changes in corporate water stewardship performance that's needed, what one or two efforts do you consider might help leverage the greatest impact? I know you touched on this a little bit, but do you have more things to add to it?
Yeah, Shama, thanks for the question. I saw it in the Q&A, and I think it's an extremely relevant question because, I mean, we're already living the water crisis, and I'm sure any company on this call will have been impacted by water challenges in some way or other. And also, I think we all appreciate that without water, everything stops, right? So I think there's really an urgency in what we're trying to do here, everyone that is part of this movement. And I think one area of important potential is actually TCFD and TNFD disclosure, because we're really looking at, okay, what's the criticality of nature and including water for the company, and it goes to show that most sectors simply cannot function without reliable access to water. So I think taking that dependency approach has been very helpful for those companies that have undergone or have gone through this exercise by seeing, okay, well, how will my business model need to evolve when I look at different climate scenarios, etc. And so I think these types of approaches also give a further appreciation of the true value of water to the economy, to society, and to natural ecosystems. So I think that's really something I can only encourage companies to undertake, looking at evaluating a company's dependence on water. And I think more broadly, I think there's also some exciting and important developments in this space by some of the key stakeholders looking at rallying collective action around key basins. So for example, the Alliance for Water Stewardship's Collective Action Accelerator that aims to gather stakeholders around specific critical basins on the implementation of water stewardship. We also have the Water Resilience Coalition's 100 Priority Basins initiative, which again looks at driving action in those basins that have the highest need and potential for impact. Or also the Freshwater Challenge, driven by various different stakeholders, including Wetlands International and WWF, again looking at linking into global policy processes around restoration of freshwater ecosystems. So there's actually plenty of opportunity also for companies to link into these efforts and to tie into existing efforts. Some of what also Marianne evoked earlier in terms of contributing to local collective action efforts that really drive impact and positive outcomes along different fronts. And then I expect a lot from the different also methodologies that are currently being elaborated and are being iterated, such as the Science-Based Targets for Nature methodologies, which are also looking to look more at chemical pollution and allowing giving companies approaches to address those. I know that there was a question to this earlier, so that's all very important in terms of continuing to guide companies in the right direction to truly, on the one hand, value the value of water for their companies, but then also really putting in place the right and appropriate types of actions to create those collective benefits at basin level.
Great, thanks, Sarah. As we near the end of the session, Marianne, any quick suggestions on how you are adopting the benchmark, or suggestion for companies looking to adopt the benchmark for scanning their own strategies?
Yes, I think it's a powerful tool. Again, I agree with what has been said. In a sense, like it offers a comprehensive and exhaustive reading grid to which every company can reflect on, to also prioritize potentially the streams or the working areas that could be addressed first, I would say, and where I would say teams can also be then attributed in terms of how to move forward on the topic. So definitely it helps scoping material challenges and activities up to speed.
Great, thanks. So that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you, panelists, for your insightful comments and feedback. I hope it was helpful for all of the stakeholder audiences that's joining us today. Could we bring us back to the, yes. So if you could all please take a moment to submit your feedback using this QR link. It's helpful for us to understand the topic for future events and what kind of sessions we need to be developing. Please note that you will also be getting a recording of the event after in a couple days' time. Thank you once again to all of the panelists for your time today, and to the audience for all of the insightful questions. We have tried to get to as many as possible during our time together. Encourage you all to look into the key findings report as well as the 4 industry sectors report. As Ben said, it's on our landing page. We have heard a lot from the companies that if they have been able to use the cross industry or cross sector findings and leading practices as helpful for scanning their own water stewardship approach. So implore you all to look into those report and reach out to us with any questions or ideas to engage. So thank you all. I'll let you all go.